"Move to the back of the plane, now, or I will call security." The words snapped through the luxury cabin like a whip, silencing the soft jazz humming through the Bose speakers. All heads turned. Margaret Ellison, 60 years old, sat quietly in seat 2A, her wool coat soaked, her silver-gray hair slightly damp from the tray of ice water that had just been accidentally spilled on her. She said nothing. The flight attendant loomed above her, tall, blonde, uniform pressed to perfection. Name tag, Kendra Lewis. Her voice oozed authority, but her eyes, contempt. "You don't look like first class. Let's not make this ugly." Margaret lifted her gaze, calm, still. "My boarding pass says otherwise." Kendra didn't look. She didn't care. And before anyone could speak, smack. The sound echoed. A full slap, open palm, across Margaret's face. Gasp. A businessman choked on his drink. A woman 2 rows back muttered to her husband, "What's an old janitor doing up here anyway?" But Margaret didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. Instead, she reached slowly into her worn leather bag, pulled out a plain gray phone, and scanned her right eye. The screen blinked once, then displayed R code. Route clearance confirmed. Margaret typed 5 words. Ethics strike. Level 1. ME. She pressed send. Quietly. No drama. No one noticed the signal had left the cabin. No one saw the secure server at SkyEthics Core HQ flash red. No one realized that 87 private aircraft were about to be grounded, because they thought she was no one, just an old woman with a wrinkled coat and the wrong kind of silence. But they didn't know. She built the system that decides who gets to fly, and today, she had just shut it down. 30 minutes earlier, Margaret Ellison had boarded the plane like anyone else. No assistance, no designer luggage, no Rolex, just a navy knit coat, a leather satchel worn soft with time, and the quiet poise of someone who'd spent a lifetime being underestimated. The boarding tunnel smelled faintly of jet fuel and citrus cleaner. As Margaret stepped into the cabin, Kendra Lewis, the same flight attendant who would later slap her, was greeting a couple in front of her. "Mr. and Mrs. Townsend, welcome back," Kendra beamed. "You're in 1A and 1B as always." Lots of eye contact, smiles, even a small bow as she took the woman's coat. Then came Margaret. No smile, no greeting, just a flat glance. "Good morning," Margaret offered politely. Kendra blinked, then frowned. "Excuse me, are you staff?" Margaret paused. "No, I'm a passenger." Kendra scanned her up and down. Coat a little too plain, shoes too sensible, hair graying at the temples. "Support crew usually boards from the rear gate," she said, voice light but cold. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I'm not support. I'm in 2A." Kendra didn't ask for the ticket. She simply stepped aside with a small, forced laugh, muttering, "Must be some kind of last-minute seat mix-up." Margaret continued down the aisle. A few heads turned as she passed, mostly younger professionals in sleek suits and cashmere coats. Someone whispered, "That old lady must have gotten upgraded by mistake." Margaret reached her seat and pulled out her phone. She tapped open her boarding pass. Seat 2A, SkyEthics delegate code, RG1P. It was clear. But she knew how this game worked. They weren't reading codes. They were reading appearances. She took her seat, folded her coat across her lap, and looked out the window. She had come from Zurich, where she'd quietly declined a keynote slot at the SkyEthics Global Forum because she didn't want the attention. Now, for the first time in years, she regretted that silence. Because people weren't just blind to power, they were addicted to image, and this time, it was going to cost them. Margaret didn't expect anyone to offer her champagne, but the way Kendra walked past her like she wasn't even there, that was intentional. Glass flutes clinked softly in the cabin. One by one, Kendra delivered drinks to the polished passengers in seats 1A, 1B, 2B, 3A. Crisp napkins, warm smiles. She even bent down slightly to fluff a man's neck pillow. But when she passed 2A, Margaret's seat, her tray shifted ever so slightly, just enough for condensation from the ice bucket to spill onto Margaret's slacks. No, sorry, no eye contact, just silence. Margaret looked down at the growing stain, then calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a small handkerchief. She dabbed the water without a word. Across the aisle, a younger woman, maybe in her 30s, earbuds in, tablet out, glanced sideways but quickly looked away. 2 rows back, a man in a sharp gray suit leaned toward his seatmate and murmured, "Why is someone like that in our section?" His seatmate, a blonde woman flipping through a fashion magazine, didn't even lower her sunglasses. Probably got bumped up by some clerical glitch. Margaret caught every word. Not that she was surprised. She'd lived long enough to recognize the tone. The "she doesn't belong here" whisper, wrapped in velvet and dipped in judgment. And she also knew, the higher the ticket price, the colder the glance. When the cabin lights dimmed in preparation for takeoff, Kendra returned with a tray of hot towels, once again skipping Margaret's row. This time, Margaret spoke. "Excuse me, may I have a towel?" Kendra paused, looked down like she hadn't noticed her before, and said, "I'll be back." She didn't come back. Margaret sat still, her back straight, fingers lightly resting on her lap. She wasn't angry. She was processing. Not the rudeness, the pattern, the kind that didn't happen because someone was having a bad day. It happened because somewhere along the line, people stopped seeing others as people. And what these passengers didn't realize was that this flight wasn't just taking off. It was being audited by the woman who built the rules. The flight had barely reached cruising altitude when Margaret quietly excused herself to the restroom. Her hands were still damp from the water. But that wasn't why she got up. She needed 30 seconds, alone, undisturbed. Inside the small lavatory, she locked the door and pulled the gray device from her bag again. No logos, no camera, just one biometric strip and a screen. She held it up to her eye. Blink. Authentication confirmed. She scrolled past several emergency options, only stopping when she reached one labeled Ethics Grid. Route Override. Silent Activation. Margaret pressed it. A soft pulse traveled silently from the device, pinging Sky Ethics Core HQ, then jumping across 17 server clusters. No alarms, no lights. Just one shift. The ethics score monitoring protocol for this flight was now live streaming to federal oversight, and it was all being recorded in real time. Back in her seat, Kendra was laughing with the couple in 1B. "That woman looked like she wandered in from a bus stop," she whispered, clearly forgetting the cabin wasn't soundproof. Margaret returned, calm as ever. She didn't sit yet. She looked at Kendra and said gently, "You should be more careful with your words." Kendra blinked. "Excuse me?" But Margaret didn't repeat herself. She sat, buckled in, folded her coat again, and waited. The flight attendants huddled in the galley, clearly agitated. A junior staffer, nervous, checked the passenger manifest. Something wasn't adding up. Margaret's name. It had a flag, an internal code. But before anyone could act, the intercom beeped. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've just been advised of a technical delay. We'll be holding in this air corridor for a few extra minutes." Margaret didn't smile. She simply whispered under her breath, "The system sees now. Let's see who else does." And just like that, 87 flights across the network slowed, paused, watched. And Margaret Ellison, unbothered, unbowed, waited in seat 2A. Not for revenge, but for the system she built to finally work. At exactly 10:27 a.m., the control center at Atlanta Hartsfield received a Level 2 query from the Sky Ethics system. 5 seconds later, it replicated across JFK, LAX, O'Hare, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Each terminal paused. On Gate 17 at LAX, a gate agent's tablet flashed. Ethics grid, Flight 792. Flagged, in-cabin discrepancy, route code, ME. The initials meant everything. Margaret Ellison, route signer, ethics founder, architect of the very infrastructure now flagging the airline. One senior controller squinted at the red alert. Wait, is this real? Run the chain of custody cert. If it's her code, it's binding. They ran it. It was her. Within minutes, 87 planes across 5 airlines were locked into holding patterns. Delays rippled. Privately owned jets were denied landing rights at 6 major hubs. And all the while, inside the sky above Denver, Margaret sipped a small cup of water. Still no towel. Still no apology. In the cockpit, the co-pilot received a coded message on his internal channel. His face went pale. Captain, we've been ethics flagged. Route code. The captain turned his head. Are you kidding me? No, sir. The woman in 2A. Her credentials just popped. She's the one. They stared at the cabin monitor. Margaret, calm, back straight, eyes closed. She owns part of the grid, the co-pilot whispered. She can lock every gate we touch. Meanwhile, the FAA emergency channel lit up. Sky Ethics Corps had sent a silent compliance warning. Passenger rights violation, route authority strike pending. Every executive who got the ping knew what that meant. If they didn't act, this wasn't just a PR issue. It was a federal operational crisis. Back on board, Kendra was still oblivious. I don't know why we're stuck. Probably weather, she muttered to a crew member. And Margaret? She didn't gloat. She simply glanced out the window as clouds shifted below. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it just quietly lands. It started with a single ping, then 2. By the time the captain stepped out of the cockpit, his internal dashboard had received 6 separate notifications from Sky Ethics Corps and FAA Ethics Oversight. Each one highlighted the same name. Passenger, Margaret Ellison. Role, Route Authority. Sky Ethics Grid Level. Override Clearance, Tier 1. Compliance Mandate. Immediate crew suspension and in-flight acknowledgement. Pending, the captain swallowed hard. He walked into the aisle, his steps slower than usual. Passengers turned their heads. Some looked confused. A few pulled off their headphones. Margaret didn't move, but her presence shifted the air around her. Calm, grounded, like the very plane she sat in answered to her, not the other way around. Ma'am, the captain said, pausing at her row, I want to sincerely apologize for what you've experienced today. It does not reflect our values. Kendra, still prepping snack trays up front, turned just in time to hear it. Her brow furrowed. Apologize for what? She asked, voice loud enough to carry. The captain's jaw clenched. We're under a federal ethics review. Live, Kendra scoffed. Because of her? The captain didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to Margaret. If there's anything you need, anything at all, just say the word. Margaret finally looked up. Her voice was quiet. Start by telling your crew who I am. 5 rows back, someone whispered, Wait, did he say Margaret Ellison? Another passenger pulled out their phone and searched. A headline popped up instantly. The woman who built the ethics grid. How Margaret Ellison quietly rewired global aviation compliance. Someone gasped. Another muttered, She runs the system. Kendra laughed. Nervous now. Oh, come on. She's just some old woman in a cardigan. Margaret stood. Slow, steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. For over 30 years, I've worked to ensure that every airline, every airport, every crew member is held to a standard, so passengers aren't judged by their age, their clothes, or their gender, so children aren't silenced, so mothers aren't humiliated. She stepped forward, just enough for her voice to carry through first class. I created the grid because I was tired of people like you thinking manners were optional and cruelty was a badge of professionalism." The silence that followed was heavier than turbulence. The captain nodded. "Ms. Ellison, per your standing authority, we'll be documenting this incident and initiating a compliance shutdown upon landing. Our legal team is being notified." Kendra's face went pale. "But she hit me," Kendra suddenly blurted. "She was being rude. I was defending airline protocol." The junior flight attendant nearby murmured, "We have it on camera, from seat 3C. Kendra's mouth fell open. Margaret looked her straight in the eye. "Power doesn't mean yelling. It means being accountable." And then she sat back down, calm, composed, like none of this surprised her. Because it didn't. She didn't want to humiliate anyone. But she wasn't about to stay quiet while someone tried to erase her humanity, in a system she helped create. And now, the system was speaking back. By the time the plane began descending, the real turbulence wasn't in the clouds. It was in the boardrooms. At Skylift Airlines headquarters, 3 VPs were locked in a call with the Federal Compliance Council. The system had already flagged. 87 flights on hold, 4 regional hubs stalled. Estimated losses, 16.4 M within 2 hours. And it was just the beginning. Who triggered the route strike? Passenger, Margaret Ellison. Wait, the Margaret Ellison? Yes, the grid mother herself. Silence. And then panic. Because Margaret didn't just use the Sky Ethics system. She authored the override protocol. She owns controlling equity in the grid's parent tech consortium, which means every airline bound to Sky Ethics answers to her signature. Back in the cabin, the junior attendant returned to Margaret's seat with trembling hands. "Ms. Ellison, FAA Compliance Director just confirmed. The grid registered your strike. Do you want to escalate to permanent suspension?" Margaret shook her head. "No, not yet." The attendant blinked. "I'm not here to ruin people," Margaret said softly. "I'm here to fix a system. Let's see who owns up first." Meanwhile, a quiet alert buzzed on Kendra's work tablet. "Urgent. Pending ethics termination review. Case number 112984A. Status: escalating. Do not interact further with route authority passenger." Kendra's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, then shut it. For the first time that flight, she was silent. At Gate 19 in Chicago, a boarding supervisor canceled 3 incoming flights and spoke into her headset. "Yeah, it's a route strike. ME code. Tell finance to freeze all affiliate bonuses until further notice." Margaret sat quietly, watching the world outside tilt and shimmer through the window. She didn't smile, but she did breathe a little deeper. The system was working, and for once, it was on time. As Flight 792 began its final descent into Denver International, the mood inside the plane had shifted. No more forced smiles, no more whispered comments, only silence and glances. People now knew who was sitting in 2A. Margaret Ellison didn't need a press team. She didn't need bodyguards or black cars waiting on the tarmac. All she needed was silence, because silence meant people were listening now. The plane touched down softly, but the moment the wheels kissed the runway, the system activated again. Sky Ethics, sync. Live incident report initiated. Flight 792 violation level, Category 1, physical misconduct by staff recommended action. Immediate crew suspension pending hearing. Inside the crew galley, Kendra's headset buzzed. A text-only directive appeared. Report to Chief of Ethics Enforcement upon landing. Do not disembark via passenger ramp. Her hands shook. Meanwhile, Gate 14. A black vehicle pulled onto the restricted tarmac. A man in a gray FAA badge vest waited with 2 compliance officers. They weren't there to greet anyone. They were there to investigate. And they had full video access to everything that had occurred at 38,000 feet. Margaret stepped off the aircraft slowly. No special treatment, no VIP escort. But every single person, gate agent, security staff, and even a nearby pilot, stood up a little straighter as she walked past. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Because you don't humiliate the woman who built the very system that determines your license to fly. As she reached the terminal, a young black woman in a gate uniform approached her, nervously. "Ms. Ellison, I just wanted to say thank you for what you've built. For what you just did." Margaret offered a gentle nod. "Make sure you build it better. That's the whole point." Behind her, the plane sat quietly at the gate, but its ripple had already begun, and the world was starting to watch. It took less than 12 hours for the story to break, not because Margaret Ellison wanted it to, but because Sky Ethics Grid had an automated disclosure protocol, and when a route strike is logged, the transparency clause kicks in. By dawn, the top headline across multiple news outlets read, "Passenger slapped mid-air triggers route code shutdown. Airline faces ethics lockout." The article didn't mention Margaret's name, just her initials, M.E. But within hours, journalists pieced it together. "She's the architect of the system," one legal analyst said on live TV. "If she pulled a level 1 strike, that means she caught the airline red-handed." Inside the FAA's Ethics Oversight HQ, a full panel review was underway. "We've confirmed video evidence of the slap. Crew training failure, lack of response protocol. Passenger identified as Margaret Ellison, confirmed route authority. Recommended action? Immediate ethics freeze across all domestic Skylift routes. Secondary review of partner airline policies. And public acknowledgement of failure." The room fell quiet. One commissioner leaned back in his chair. She warned them. 5 years ago, they built their profits and ignored the grid. Back at Skylift Corporate, executives were scrambling. A PR team drafted a sincere apology. A VP of compliance drafted a resignation letter, and someone in legal whispered, "She could revoke our gate access for international terminals. We need to settle." But there was no way to spin the footage. The slap, the words, the fact that the woman they humiliated literally helped write the federal ethics compliance system now threatening to shut them down. Meanwhile, Margaret sat quietly in her Denver apartment. Simple, warm. No marble floors or flashy furniture, just plants, books, and the hum of old jazz on vinyl. She wasn't watching the news. She was reading a letter from a young girl who had seen the clip online. "Dear Ms. Ellison, I'm 15. I want to work in aviation someday. But sometimes I wonder if people like me belong there. Watching what you did made me feel like maybe we do." Margaret placed the letter down, exhaled slowly. This was why she built the grid. Across social media, the phrase, "that the grid is working," began trending. People weren't just angry. They were hopeful. Hopeful that the days of unchecked power were over. Hopeful that ethics weren't just posters on break room walls. And hopeful that somewhere someone was watching the skies, not just for safety, but for dignity. The conference room was full, but no one was speaking. Skylift's executive team sat around the long walnut table like students waiting for a verdict. Legal was at one end, compliance at the other. The CEO, Darren Kessler, sat dead center, arms folded, jaw tight. Then she walked in, Margaret Ellison. No entourage, no briefcase, just presence. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. "You asked for this meeting," she said evenly. "So let's talk." The room held its breath. Kessler cleared his throat. "Ms. Ellison, on behalf of the board, we deeply regret the incident you endured. It was not reflective of who we are." Margaret's eyes didn't move. "You know what's not reflective? Your policies, your training manuals, your internal audits. You built a customer-facing empire on friendly slogans while letting your crew humiliate people like it was standard operating procedure." Legal shifted in their seats. Kessler tried again. "We're open to settlement. We can issue a public statement, offer a donation to your foundation." She cut him off. "I don't want a check, Darren. I want your signature. He blinked. My signature on what? She slid a folder across the table. Inside, the Sky Ethics Charter Addendum, a binding contract that would make Skylift the first U.S. airline to adopt real-time passenger ethics monitoring, mandatory quarterly crew evaluations, and a zero-strike racial profiling policy enforceable by third-party review. Sign it, she said, and I freeze the root code. No further media, no stockholder alarm, no blacklisting from federal terminals. Kessler hesitated. Or, she added, don't sign it, and watch what happens when 14 international airports see their compliance partners list Skylift as under ethics embargo. Your 7.3 in trade routes vanish before lunch. Someone whispered, she's bluffing. Margaret smiled. Try me. 10 minutes later, he signed. It wasn't clean, it wasn't gracious, but it was official. The first airline had bent to the grid. On her way out, Margaret passed a group of young interns in the lobby, none older than 25. One of them stared wide-eyed. Was that her? A voice whispered. That's Margaret Ellison, another replied. The woman who rewrote aviation. Margaret turned slightly, smiled. Make it kinder than I did, she said. The next version is yours. And with that, she was gone. No press, no camera crew, just the hum of a system, one she'd quietly built over decades, now turning on like a light across the entire sky. 3 weeks later, the world had changed. Skylift wasn't just complying with the new charter, it was promoting it. Billboards, TV ads, even pre-flight videos highlighting their Ethics First initiative. Other airlines followed. Some reluctantly, some proudly, all out of necessity. Because once the route strike went public, customers began choosing ethics over points, and airports started setting minimum grid ratings as a condition for gate access. Margaret didn't chase any of this. She wasn't on a media tour. She refused interviews, declined awards. Instead, she spent most of her days volunteering at a local aviation mentorship program in Denver. One Thursday afternoon, a group of teenagers gathered around her after a workshop. A girl with braids raised her hand. Ms. Ellison, why didn't you just sue them? You could have taken everything. Margaret smiled gently. Because the point isn't to break the system, it's to rewire it. Another student leaned in. You're saying one person can really change that much? She nodded. One person with principles, yes. One person with power, not always. But if you have both and you use them the right way, you don't just change one flight. You change the industry. That night, Margaret sat on her porch with a mug of tea. No headlines, no alerts. Just the stars overhead and the quiet knowledge that something better had taken flight. Some revolutions aren't loud. They start in silence, with a slap, a call, a refusal to accept how it's always been. And from there, they soar. The Senate hearing was held in a packed chamber, not because of scandal, but because of momentum. For the first time in years, Congress wasn't reacting to a tragedy in the skies. They were responding to a fix, designed not by lobbyists, but by the very woman who had once been shoved out of her seat and told she didn't belong. Margaret Ellison stood behind the microphone, calm, poised, 60 years old, and somehow stronger than ever. The chairman leaned forward. Ms. Ellison, you've given us the framework for what may become the first national aviation ethics standard. Do you believe the industry can truly change? She didn't hesitate. I don't believe in miracles, Senator, but I believe in systems and people. And God help us if we don't start holding those systems accountable to the people they serve. A pause, then applause. Not the polite kind, the kind that rises when truth is spoken plainly. 3 months later, the Federal Aviation Passenger Dignity Act passed with bipartisan support. It mandated a national ethics score for all commercial airlines, anonymous cabin conduct tracking synced with FAA audits, mandatory training for de-escalation and bias response, passenger right to record protections. They called it the Ellison Protocol, not because she wanted her name on it, but because there was no other name that made sense. At Denver International, a new sign hung in Terminal C. This airline participates in sky ethics, monitored for dignity, safety, and fairness. Next to it, a small plaque. In honor of Margaret Ellison, who believed the skies belong to everyone. Back at home, Margaret didn't slow down. She launched a scholarship fund for underrepresented students in aviation. She expanded the mentorship program, and once a month, she took a commercial flight, quietly, anonymously, just to test the system she'd built. Not to catch someone doing wrong, but to make sure people were doing right when no one was watching. One day, a young mom boarded with her child, nervous, tired, trying not to make a scene. Margaret watched quietly as a flight attendant, barely older than the girl, knelt down, offered the kid headphones, and smiled. Not staged, not for points, just kindness. And Margaret thought to herself, this is what it's supposed to be. Not every slap ends with reform, but some do. When power meets principle, when silence breaks, even the most broken systems can learn to fly again. If you believe dignity should never depend on what seat you're in or what you look like, hit that like button. And if you think the Ellison Protocol should be mandatory on every airline, type "I believe in fair skies" in the comments.